Hi, welcome to another Graphite Studio tutorial. In this video, we'll learn how to debug behaviors in Graphite Studio. If you've completed the Graphite Studio Beginner Guide Chapter 1, you'll recognize the simple interest calculator we built. But in this case, there's something going wrong with the calculation. So we're going to debug the click behavior of this calculate button. In order to find the behavior behind the calculate button, I'm going to copy the name of the HTML file and paste it into the Graphite project. Then I'll select the view that shows up. In order to get the properties of the calculate button, I'll push the Control key on the keyboard and click on the calculate button. This will select the widget and display its properties. One of the properties listed is the onClick behavior, and the behavior behind the onClick is displayed here. When I click this, it will bring up the behavior flowchart. In order to switch debug on for this behavior, there's a bug icon in the upper right section of the screen. Click the icon, and when it turns red, this means I'm debugging the behavior. If I wanted to debug the behavior, calculate simple interest, in the entity interest, all I have to do is click these three lines, and it will navigate me to the calculate simple interest behavior, and I can switch on the debug there. Before I can go into the application and debug these behaviors, there's something I need to check. I have to go to the settings, go to the debug tab, and switch on debug session. One thing to note, Graphite Studio projects should always be built in debug mode. When you start a new project in Graphite, it's automatically set to release mode, so you would have to put the project into debug mode, do a build, and then you can start debugging behaviors. So now that I've started a debug session, I'll click OK. If you switch off debug sessions, you can leave this debug switch on and continue development, and debugging will not activate. Now that I've switched on debug session, I'll go back to the browser and click calculate. Now if I go back to Graphite Studio, I can see that the start shape now has a glow around it. What this means is that the control has stopped at this shape. Going back to the browser, you can see that the calculate button has a spinner on it because it has paused the behavior at this point. Going back to Graphite again, when the control is stopped, you will see a toolbar display above the flowchart. When you push next, control will move to the next shape. When you push continue, it will either continue to the next behavior or finish your debugging. The eyeglasses shows you all the variables in the contact. Whenever you see empty, this means that the particular variable is a null. As you can see, the variables that were entered in the fields were duration 9, principal 5000, and rate 4.5. So when I step through each shape, the context variables will change accordingly. Because I set the breakpoint for calculate simple interest, when I push next, it will traverse to this behavior and stop the control at the start shape. To review, if I click the eyeglasses, I see which variables are in context. When you're in the start shape, the variables you see are the inputs and the outputs of this behavior. We can confirm this by double-clicking on the start shape and seeing the variables listed here as well. When I step forward, control will move to the decision shape. Since principal was entered as 5000, control brought me to the evaluate accrued amount shape. Here is where the accrued amount is calculated based on this formula. When we step forward again, I can click the eyeglasses again and see that the accrued amount is 25,250. I can now see that there is something wrong with this calculation. I'll double click on the shape and I can see that the rate is being divided by 10 instead of 100. Because I found where the error is occurring, I can click continue and let the debug continue back to the browser. I'm going to double click on the evaluate accrued amount shape and change the 10 to 100 and click save. Because I've modified the flowchart, I will have to rebuild the project. I'll purge the previous build and click build. Now I'll go back to the browser and refresh. I'll re-enter the same information and push calculate. Because we haven't switched off debug session, it will walk us through the behaviors again. This time, I can see that the accrued amount looks good. So I'll push next and continue. I'll go back to the browser and I can see the simple interest value is fixed. If I go back to Graphite now and go to the settings, I'll click the Debug tab and switch off the debug session. If I go back to the browser, I'll click Calculate again and see that it calculates the simple interest. And that's how you debug with Graphite Studio. Thanks for watching.